There you go. I'll look to share my screen. Uh, there we go. Uh, oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Is everybody seeing that? Like they are? Yeah, thumbs up.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. So I'll put that at the top as well. So yes, here today, my name is Matt Timmins. I'll share a little bit more about myself in a second. But yeah, kind of appreciate you joining firstly as well, like giving up time in kind of the middle of an afternoon on a Tuesday to listen a bit here about some thoughts on the kind of the importance of scaling carbon dioxide removal. You'll often hear it called CDR for short, to really help now. We're at this crucial point where it's kind of needed to help avert climate disaster. And so excited to kind of share some thoughts in that regard. In terms of what I'm going to be talking about, firstly, awareness is a huge piece. So firstly, kind of like what the Dickens is CDR all about? Why there's no net zero now without carbon removal or CDR being in the mix? What's the current state? What's the current state of this industry in terms of the scale challenge ahead, where we are now, the scale challenge ahead, and the reality at the moment for carbon dioxide removal developers, people working on these novel techniques to draw carbon back out of the atmosphere? Hopefully, a little bit of a painted picture of what is possible, though, in getting CDR to climate relevant scale. And I'll share more in a bit about what climate relevant scale in this context is all about. And finally, a little bit about what we're doing. You will see Reearthers at the bottom. What we at Reearthers are doing to play a role in this scale, in this big scale journey ahead for CDR. And so, in terms of me, I'm one of two co-founders of a company called Reearthers. I believe Sue, my co-founder, is on the call today as well, which is great. And again, we'll share more in a bit about what we're up to specifically to help this industry. But in terms of my background, probably firstly and most importantly, I don't have a scientific background. In fact, neither does Sue in CDR, but we're both kind of very put here fastidious learners. So in my case, I've been kind of studying the CDR industry as part of a broad range of solutions to the climate change problem at our disposal for near enough a year now. But in terms of what I do bring, kind of my background, like thinking of a couple of things, like definitely bring systems thinking and product mindset to the table. And those points really dovetail with the other 2 points about my kind of background and experience, which is really characterized by over 10 years of experience in software, and specifically software from a go-to-market perspective. So less on the engineering and software development side, more selling and servicing and getting customers to value with software products, but also definitely not in the climate tech space. Most of my career was actually spent, interestingly enough, in HR technology solutions. But either way, I'm very, very passionate about the importance of what's called customer-led growth. And it's this idea of a very, very customer-centric approach to aligning product or software solutions to different customers' desired, and it's crucial the desired business level outcomes that they have from using a myriad of kind of software solutions. So that's me. Definitely not a CDR kind of pro from a formal academic standpoint, but have been learning a lot and hopefully sharing and passing on, paying it forward a little bit to some of you all to hear listening to me today. So without further ado, the first key thing is kind of like, yeah, what is CDR all about then, carbon dioxide removal? Well, in short, it's human activity that captures carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it away for decades to ideally millennia. So it's really looking for permanent levels of carbon storage. There are three key principles that this graphic from the very recently released second edition of the State of CDR report, the launch webinar for that was literally just last week. The first key principle is that it has to be drawing carbon out of the atmosphere. It's not carbon at source from fossil sources. So that's principle number one. The principle number two that I was alluding to with decades to millennia is durability of the storage of the captured carbon from the atmosphere. So what we don't want to see is the carbon really quickly getting readmitted to the atmosphere. That's the last thing we want. And the third principle is that it has to be as a result of a human intervention in addition, so, or to augment the Earth's natural processes. So the natural carbon sinks that are going on, what human activities on top are playing a role there. That's what CDR is all about. The other important thing there to call out then is there's often a discrepancy or a mixture in the language you see, actually even in the common media, between CDR and what's called, you'll see it here, carbon capture and storage, or CCS. So CCS is all about capturing carbon emissions at source, for instance, from power plants or from cement producers, for instance, and actually stopping them being emitted into the atmosphere and stopping that carbon being emitted to the atmosphere in the first instance. And so if you think about it, carbon capture and storage, therefore, is actually a form of emissions reduction. It isn't actually carbon dioxide removal. So that is a key and important distinction to kind of clear up there right at the start. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. That then begs the question, okay, well, what are all the different CDR methods that we have at our disposal? And really, again, the State of CDR report, I thought, did a good job of characterizing these. There's really two broad categories. There's this idea of conventional CDR techniques, and then there's novel CDR. And the characterization in these buckets is really based on the method's characteristics. So there's three key things there. Their current level of readiness for deployment, the scale at which they're already deployed, and the type of carbon storage they employ. So once it's been captured, the carbon, again, a crucial element of how is it being stored away for those decades to ideally millennia in terms of timeframes. So then on to some of the specifics of conventional. These methods are characterized by the fact that they're more well established. They're already being deployed at pretty sizable scale, and they're crucially widely reported already by countries. That can be as part of land use, like land use changes, and as part of forestry activities. And so as you can see on the slide, the ones in the gray area are the ones that come into the conventional categories. So afforestation, reforestation, agroforestry, and forest management. You've then got peat land and coastal wetland restoration. You've got soil, all the soil carbon sequestration mechanisms, so in the croplands and also on grasslands. And finally, durable via durable wood products. And then on the novel side, these methods are characterized by storage of carbon, either in geological formations, in the ocean, in the huge ocean, 70% of the Earth, that's the water, or in products. These methods typically have much lower levels of readiness for deployment and are therefore currently being deployed at much smaller scales. I'm going to talk a little bit more of some of the finer points on how novel is in a couple of slides' time. But some of the examples of the methods, again, the ones more in the orange area down here, but you've got things like biochar, you've got things like enhanced rock weathering, you've got mechanisms, you might have heard a little bit about direct air carbon capture and storage. Of the novel methods, they tend to be the ones that have gotten quite a lot of press coverage and early venture capital dollars from a funding perspective. And also in our oceans, there are many ocean or marine-based CDR novel techniques, but one of the most promising that's being looked at is something called ocean alkalinity enhancement. Again, this is drawn from that same State of CDR second edition report. So that's the kind of like what CDR is and what the different methods are. Then what about the why? Like, why are we like, why is this even a thing? Like, why do we need to think about carbon dioxide removal now in a big way? And it's really about saying, I think we all probably know the unfortunate reality of just the pace of decarbonisation of our economies has just been woefully, painfully slow. And it's almost this idea that we're now in almost an unfortunate position where carbon dioxide removal has to become a key part of the overall solution mix. And from as per the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so the science experts here, there are now no pathways to keeping temperatures at that kind of at the Paris Agreement level of only 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures without massive amounts of CDR in addition to decarbonisation. And so, in short, there's now no net zero scenario left at our disposal without CDR. And so, and that's shown by kind of like this neat illustration that we wanted to include that my wonderful co-founder Sue kind of drew here. So that's the reality. We obviously decarbonisation still has to be the huge focus, but CDR now has to be in focus for organisations and for governments as well. And that's the deal, and that's where we are. And so that's the why. Well, what about the scale challenge ahead? So like that's the context. Where are we right now? And what do we need to be getting to? And in short, we need to be removing up to 10 billion tons of carbon every year from the atmosphere by 2050, by the mid-century point. That's a massive amount if you think about it. So yes, billions of tons every single year. That can be sometimes called gigatons. So you might have heard it called 10 gigatons needed of total CDR being drawn out of the atmosphere every year by 2050. Huge amounts. And it's the idea of every single year by that point. That's the amount, the sheer amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere that we all know is causing all of the heating and all of the huge kind of challenges that we have in terms of potential climate disaster ahead if we don't do something about this. But the reality is, today we are nowhere near this scale. We are miles off track. And so if we just consider novel CDR for a moment, admittedly those are the techniques here. This again, this graphic from that same State of CDR second edition report tries to show levels of overall CDR that we were at in 2020, proposed levels. It also considers the different scenarios for higher conventional versus higher novel. But just thinking about novel, we know they're less deployed at the moment, but they've got huge potential. We've got to consider them if we're going to get to 10 billion tons every year by 2050. We've literally, so far cumulatively, only removed 700,000 tons by novel techniques. That's cumulatively all up to date. That, I believe, is something like 0.05% of that total that we need to be doing every year by 2050. And in 2023 alone, so last year, by novel techniques, there was 200,000 tons being removed by these novel mechanisms. And so that sounds scary in terms of how far off we are. So at that point, we always need to kind of try and take a step back a little bit, right, and go, okay, how might we break this down? And I came across a very interesting new report from the Rocky Mountain Institute just the other day that was trying to do exactly like that. And so basically, it was considering a 2030 timeframe as a stepping stone to then 2050. And so if we consider last year we did 200,000 tons by novel methods, they were saying we need to triple the industry every year for the next 6 years up to 2030 to mean that we are then have any viability or pathway to get to those 10 billion tons, to get to those 10 gigatons of removal that's needed every year by the crucial 2050 point. And so that's what's there. So 600,000 tons this year via novel methods is needed. That's what's that, 1.8 million next year, 2025, 5.4 million tons being removed by the novel methods in 2026, and so on and so forth. You kind of get the idea. Up to 2030. So there's no two ways about it. This, if we can pull it off, this will be one of the humankind's, one of our greatest, I guess, ever scaling feats as I say, if we can pull it off. But like we stand here today on the optimistic side of the equation and going, we can do it, but collaboration and working together is going to be more important than it kind of ever before if this is going to kind of work. And on that point, just like what's the current reality? Like what do we see from our research? Again, later, like what we're going to kind of do about it with Reearthers. But what are we hearing from CDR developers on the ground in terms of that current reality they're grappling with, in terms of trying to commercialize, trying to get traction in terms of scaling their projects up to kind of megaton scale on the way to then that gigaton level of removal scale that's ultimately needed for that climate relevance. Fortunately, there's loads of really, really smart people out there, right? Like way smarter than me, like working on these pioneering mechanisms, certainly on that novel CDR side of the equation in terms of the methods. But really, they're facing an operating environment today categorized by a couple of key things, like so a lack of any kind of predictable levels of demand for their products, for what they're doing, for the drawing down of the CO2 from the atmosphere via these novel mechanisms. There's a real immaturity still of crucially policy and regulatory mechanisms to help make and scale a market. And also, there's kind of like the quality, the crucial quality. Like, how are we proving what's going on here? Like this is an invisible gas we're talking about. These quality assurance mechanisms, unfortunately, are also kind of relatively in their infancy as it stands today. The other key thing is kind of like there's also seemingly no playbook of best practice yet. We're dealing with, as you can tell by now through the tone and some of the points I've shared, it's an extremely nascent industry as it stands today. So there's no real playbook of best practice. Like me and Siwe, we're both used to software environments where you can go online and there's kind of like from venture capital funds, there's kind of like aggregated guides to like how to navigate key go-to-market problems in terms of getting traction. There just isn't that for CDR developers at the moment. And so they don't really know where to look for guidance and best practice in terms of crucially getting access to the right knowledge, tools and resources at their disposal to help them go faster and to know what kind of good looks like. And so that is going to really need to change as well if we're going to see thousands of these developers get to that traction, get to that megaton, and then crucially onto that gigaton level scale. So it's a picture of nascency and like all to do in like a massive, massive way. But when we were thinking about it, when I took a step back and thought about, okay, like how can we paint a picture? Like how can we take that glass half full attitude, a mindset, and figure out like, well, how's this going to be possible? Like, what's a painted picture of how we're going to get to 10 billion tons of CDR being done every single year by 2050? And I naturally went to the famous Archimedes quote of give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. If we break that down, like what did he mean? Like what did he mean when he was saying that? Like there was a couple of things that were there that I think have good relevance here to like what's going to be needed in this space. There has to firstly be a clear objective. And that in this case is pretty abundantly clear. We've talked a lot about that already. Like by 2030, it's something like 285 million tons being needed to be done by novel mechanisms on that pathway to 10 billion tons by the mid-century point, by the 2050 point. So that the objective is abundantly clear. You also need strong foundations, and you also need access to the right tools, resources, and knowledge. And so he was espousing that, and with those three things, any insurmountable or seemingly impossible challenge can be overcome. And so it's characterized by a mindset of really pursuing new knowledge, pursuing knowledge. We've got these developers doing that, coming up with really, really good techniques. We need to then take that knowledge and apply it into innovative mechanisms. And then get access to the right tools and resources to help. So yeah, that's the quote I go to. As I say, the objective is abundantly clear. But then that begs the question of what about putting the strong foundations in place in terms of the fulcrum, the lever and the fulcrum from the quote there? And I'm really, really positive that we can apply the learning by doing mindset here. So this comes from a report from the World Resources Institute, but really a learning by doing mindset that instills positive feedback loops to really get this industry to a positive tipping point. So if you think about it, that's characterized by more private companies and ideally governments showing strong demand signals for these CDR companies' techniques. That then incentivizes more CDR developers to enter the market. And those that are in the market are really, really incentivized to further improve their methodologies, to further constrain and burn down remaining uncertainties in terms of the different elements of their technique, in terms of quantifying the level of carbon that is being removed by their mechanisms. And inefficiencies in the technology will be reduced, which of course allows these companies to come down the cost curve. And all that to say that crucially, then that instills a lower price point for these techniques, for the carbon drawdown in the actual marketplace. So yeah, strong demand drives increase in better supply, which ultimately lowers the cost. And that's what we mean by the positive feedback loops and getting this industry to a tipping point. But of course, that sounds great. This is all lofty and like Matt's like just, reading some reports and like trying to paint this really positive picture here for people that have joined today. But it's not going to happen on its own. This has to be, again, back to that everybody working together. It's going to need government and it's going to need private actors to really work in unison here. And it needs to be to do the following things. It needs to be to continue to drive innovation. It needs to be to perform crucial market shaping activities. It needs to be to get the regulatory guardrails in place that can ensure only good is being done here, not harm. And also in terms of the quality assurance mechanisms as well. And the crucial other thing, getting the public bought in, getting people in communities to understand why this is important and making sure these things are being done, as I say, in a socially and environmentally just way. The justice piece is an oft forgotten, but has to be a huge part of this as well. And on that, I don't know if I've missed some of these already, but I noticed there that I finally paused and seen Brendan, you raised your hand. So yeah, let me what has that raised up for you?
Oh yeah, thank you for that information. Yeah, my name's Brendan Cornthwaite. I'm the CEO and founder of UAP. We are just to give you guys a bit of background, we're actually designing and developing a new type of direct air capture technology. So very appropriate. It's called an atmosphere processing plant. Now, something that just we've come to realize is direct air capture and capturing CO2 and all these other things are great, but we're also looking at the environmental impacts from a different standpoint. We're actually positioning ourselves as an atmosphere engineering company. And what that means is that we're taking into account and we're spending a lot of time and we will be spending a lot of resources on understanding once we take out this greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and we're putting clean air back into the atmosphere, what's really happening at a deeper level to the environment. So it's all well and good saying, okay, let's take out 10 billion tons of CO2, but what knock-on effects is that going to start having to the surrounding, to the surrounding atmosphere, the stratosphere, so on and so forth. There's also a lot of issues we also need to take into consideration is that, we have a lot of greenhouse gases also in places we can't reach, the stratosphere, for example. And we're also going to need to start looking at technologies that we can start pulling that down because, and this leads into my next point is a lot of companies right now are focused on just CO2 capture, which is great, but CO2 is just actually one part of the problem. Methane is 84 times worse over a 20-year period than carbon dioxide. Our system actually does capture methane, by the way, in case you're wondering. But it's people are missing key points to this that really need to be taken into consideration. You know, meteorology is going to play a huge part in what we do. I just thought that was relevant at this point. Thank you.
Brendan, appreciate your point so much. Totally resonates. The whole, yeah, like we're deliberately here focused, of course, on the CO2 conundrum, but in one of the fellowship programs, I studied on my kind of climate like pathway into learning about climate change all up and like all the different things that are needed. Of course, greenhouse gas removal is the really thing here, kind of above just carbon removal, right? Like, so your thing about methane totally resonates, and of course there are others too. And great to hear about kind of like what you're specifically working on. I hope when we get near the end of this and like what we're doing and trying to help the industry more specifically, yeah, it might have resonant kind of relevance for you, and you might want to kind of get involved. So more on that to come. But yeah, I really appreciate you jumping in and sharing those points. I don't know if that raised up anything else for anybody else listening in before I kind of get back to the rest of the other couple of points that I've got to share. There we are. I think I can now see the chat. All right. No, okay. Well, if not, then I will proceed forwards. So yeah, I was saying we're just talking about the learning by doing cycle, positive feedback loops of, theoretically how that's possible. I guess more specifically though, like how's it going to be done? I mentioned like we need private and public actors to work together here in unison. Like really specifically, we're talking about targeted policy interventions being needed that kind of do three things that make these mechanisms way more affordable than they are today, certainly on the novel CDR as it pertains to the novel CDR techniques. Um, it needs to be much more popular and socially desirable. Um, and so what are the policy plays that can help with that? And crucially accessible as well, supported by the right enabling infrastructure. So making a virtuous market cycle in the right way. And some of this thinking also, I should say, comes from, like we put the graphic here, comes from the Global Tipping Points report. That was a report I think that was released a year or so back. Excellent stuff in there about as it pertains not just to, of course, this industry, but how you can make markets and make new industries work in kind of any domain. But some of the specific points that back to how it does pertain to CDR though. So in terms of lowering costs, as I've alluded to, kind of both governments and private sector actors have key roles to play here. So really governments, it needs to be in the form of a couple of things. Well, a few things. It needs to be in the form of funding. Like they need to be a huge funding source here for catalyzing research, development, and demonstration projects. They need to provide incentives for deployment of these novel techniques. So think there are things like tax credits, those types of mechanisms that governments can deploy. Actual government procurement itself of CDR. If you think about it, carbon removal, really we're talking about, it's characterized as a definition of a public good. And so when we say a lack of predictable demand, it's because demand's got to almost be made here. It's got to be artificially created. And so governments have a crucial role to play there. And then lastly, but kind of like eventually, this is probably less in the near here and now, but eventually there's likely going to need to be compliance policy, right? Like getting entities, whether it's private companies or otherwise, to be mandated to purchase CDR as part of their defined net zero strategies as corporations, as organizations. The good thing is the US government has kind of been starting to lead the way a little bit there. Yeah, if the US kind of gets involved in a big way, that can only be a good thing for this industry in some ways. Specifically, what I mean by that is they've actually recently been the first to actually announce a public procurement program for CDR. On the private sector end of the spectrum, There's a concept called the Frontier Advanced Market Commitment. So again, advanced market commitment is a private sector mechanism to try to jumpstart demand for a new industry. That's been led by Stripe and a few other technology businesses that have jumped on board with that. And that's offering, I believe, £1 billion of funding across 8 years to support the scaling up of novel CDR techniques. And there are other things like innovation prizes from most notably from competitions like X Prize. Again, I don't know, maybe people have heard of that. X Prize and others that are really, yeah, again, incentivizing innovation from private CDR developers. Then it's about saying, thinking about carb CDR, if you think about it, unlike other climate technologies, carbon removal, let's face it, as you've seen the nascency, it's still pretty new and relatively unknown. And it's also, again, hopefully I've done somewhat of an okay job of trying to like share what it is, but some of these techniques are highly, Brendan, you could probably do a better job of me and with what your specific technique, but they're pretty complex and technical mechanisms and processes that we're talking about here. And so in terms of getting public to be like involved and on board with this, like clear, simple communication, like education and a lot of awareness building really are critical to enhance that public perception and increase, crucially, the attractiveness of CDR solutions as part of the overall kind of climate solution mix of strategies that are kind of at our disposal. And so I was thinking about it like in these terms, like I suppose like any change management best practice, like as these CDR projects are in their kind of infancy and being developed, kind of going from the laboratories to the early field trial stage, more specifically, really there's a need for these developers to be prioritizing early and consistent kind of community and stakeholder engagement. Because if where are these techniques going to be deployed? Those host communities may well have a bunch of concerns, rightly so, about what's going on in their area. And so, but getting them on board early and actively involved in the discussion is likely to be the best way that those concerns can be mitigated, how they can be allayed early and upfront. And then thirdly is the need for these robust governance and regulatory guardrails, so that the projects are being done in a sustainably and in an environmentally and socially just way. And crucially, the other point, and I don't think I've maybe mentioned that enough actually, is that we don't want these projects to be taking the place of the focus still on massive amounts of carbon emission reduction programs. And so yes, Alison,
Hi.
hey,
Um, hi. You just talked about stakeholder and public engagement. What sort of things do you find? What do you imagine might be a consternation for public about this kind of thing?
you mean what might they have
Yeah,
concerns
yeah,
about?
yeah.
So yeah, it's a great question. So there are things like it depends on the techniques. But like for instance, like, and again, Brendan, I'm sure you've got thoughts as it pertains to direct air capture. But there are things about like where are the direct air capture facilities going to be built? So in terms of like housing them in different areas, that's a question that would need rightly engagement with communities of like where are we figuring out where to build the plants? Like before what I'm currently working on, I was very interested up front more in the marine removal space in terms of the marine pathways. So there you've got to think about things like obviously like fishing community, like people like fishing communities, like people in
Yeah.
coastal.
I mean, yeah. So that bit is my job. I know that bit. The bit I'm saying, what are they going to say? It smells. The traffic is bad. What are they going to see?
If you don't
What?
mind
Yeah.
me
I mean,
jumping in here,
yeah.
I think DAC technology in particular, let's stick with that, let's stick to what I know, is, going to have to be large. Here's the thing.
Okay. Right.
So it's going to take up quite a bit of space. It's probably going to be noisy. It's not going
Yeah.
to smell or anything like that. But it's going to be visually we're trying to make ours visually appealing, but a lot of them are not visually appealing. So it's
Yeah.
going to be in an area, but it's probably going to be situated in an industrial area. So people who live closer to those areas tend to already have an understanding, you know.
Yeah.
Going back, just taking a little step back here to what you're talking about, the public perception in general, and we've been having this conversation a lot recently, is the part of the problem is people just don't understand the problem in general.
Yeah.
So, people are not getting a grasp of really how close we are to, at the tipping point and all that sort of stuff. And so then going to them and trying to explain, hey, we've got this to do this, when they don't have an understanding of the core problem, is a problem within itself.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
so we not only do we people here right now and myself and the government, we need to start an education program for the general public about, watching the carbon footprint and these technologies that are going to be coming into their environments, their neighborhoods, their everything else, and need to understand why. That is going to take a long time, but it's going to be necessary because we can't have fight back when we're trying to build these, because that could add several years to a project that we don't have.
Yeah. Exactly.
I hope that sort of explains, gives you sort of what we've been thinking about.
Yeah. So when you say large, how large? We're talking nuclear power plant large?
Yeah. So our technology can be scaled, right? So we can do it on a smaller scale. So they can go like in neighborhoods, for example. But we're also looking at infrastructure type projects, the size of power stations. We're actually talking with Heysham power stations. I don't know if you guys are familiar in the Northwest. Those are closing down in the next few years. Obviously, that's going to be a huge job loss for the community, huge skills and job loss for the community. And we were trying to angle for building one of our facilities down, in Heysham. It has access to the port as well, for that reason. So, and the reason is, it goes back to the public perception, is they're going to have to be large, about 750 to 1,000 feet tall to really make a difference. And they are then, if you're building by the power station, people already have an understanding. I'm already used to sort of seeing that, so we have to take these things into consideration as well. The power stations are about 750 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously there are different types, but that is one type.
Yeah.
You are definitely going to need what you've just said about the education. But that's going to have to be, that's not just your responsibility. That's the government's responsibility as well.
Correct.
Hopefully many of these industries and many of the people who need to change will be thinking about how better to do that, properly portrayed as a crisis and an urgency, which it has been for years, but no political person is taking it on yet.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I compare it to, like, people don't understand where the food comes from. People don't also understand where this is coming from, and so it's the same thing. It's almost, it's an education thing, and unfortunately, some people just don't care. But it's
because they don't make the link. It's not that they don't care, it's that they literally haven't got the link. There's an actual missing link there. Once you make the link, they do care. But then what is the missing link? And also there's something much more fundamental than you're talking about, which is that people do not understand how science is done. That is one of the fundamental links where if you don't do that, you have nothing. Because they don't believe you. Because they think, oh, you're just like Trump, you just spit out any old thing, you're just doing it because you're a business. And so how science is done at all is the first step that needs to happen, really. And that's why I have to do, when I do public dialogue about policy, which is government policy, or mainly government policy, that's the first thing we have to do. We have to explain how people do science, and then we have to explain who these scientists are that are in the room talking to them.
And just I'm sorry, and just while we're talking about policy as well, is that me and my co-founders are just a huge, we're kind of banking on it, that policy changes in the UK, EU, and worldwide are going to drive this business model. because it kind of has to, otherwise nothing's going to get done. Anyway, so I appreciate your time. So thanks for listening to me.
No, not at all. I think I'm glad it's provoked. I think that's I suppose we hoped it would kind of provoke some thoughts like this, and for people who are better qualified than me, to be totally honest, to kind of raise up some of these points. So Brendan, Alison, appreciate that. I was just thinking there. I was just thinking maybe the other one that certainly from what I was presenting so far that hadn't come out clearly enough. It's just saying it's looking back to my notes. It's kind of like my last point actually on this slide anyway that I was going to raise was the whole quality conundrum, right? Why would people be skeptical about these techniques? Well, if you think about the what mechanism for demand do we have at the moment in lieu of governments getting involved and mandating this in any big way? It is the reliance on the VCM. It is the reliance on the voluntary carbon markets. And of course, people in the the public have very likely seen some of the media coverage of the kind of the traditional carbon offsetting markets. Like before, we were trying to create a newer, better market for high quality, durable like carbon dioxide removal. It was the sheer billions of dollars that have been traded for these traditional kind of projects that it might have been harder to prove, like, was there an element of greenwashing going on, is what I'm trying to say there, right? There was that Guardian report that was probably the most famous one. I think it was towards the start of 2023, so last year. There was then all of the kind of the rightly so, the media storm about that South Pole company, but basically the point is billions of dollars being traded in the VCM for traditional kind of offsetting, carbon offsetting. And it's kind of like, well, what was the real like climate impact there? A little bit questionable, notwithstanding clearly some positive impacts on local communities, certainly in the global south, but the carbon impact much more questionable. And so to get, certainly as it pertains to these novel carbon dioxide removal techniques, the getting robust standards in place for like how to properly measure, report, and verify what developers' techniques are producing as the output in terms of carbon drawdown, that's going to be critical to driving trust in the market as well.
Yeah, I think a good point here to make here as well. The current carbon credit system is like the Wild West. There's no regulation. There's just, people are just taking the piss. There's no better way of putting it. And, that is eroding confidence in what we're trying to do. People will start taking into consideration as well the high energy usage of these carbon capture units, a lot of them. And so there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of negatives. We're working towards a solution, but, it's going to take time.
It totally is, but to your point, when like it's the cheat game. We don't kind of necessarily have loads of time either, so it's kind of like how can we get governments on board? Like, how can we get these policy mechanisms starting to kind of hum there to kind of make this work? Awesome. Just conscious of the time. Yeah, I think the final point was the final couple of slides was really okay. Like just to give a bit of a shine a light, a bit about like what we're trying to do at Reearthers. So back to the Archimedes quote, like we have the objective, as we know, is clear, like strong foundations. We've talked there like how that can be done, like how it's possible to put the strong foundations in place. We're clearly not there yet. The need again for the governments in particular for the policy and regulatory bodies to really lean into this industry in a big way. That's going to be crucial. But back to the kind of like the how, again, hopefully some of this might resonate for you, Brendan, like as a developer, like as working on one of these techniques, but the conundrum of enabling developers to tap into the right tools, knowledge, and resources to help them on their journey of getting to commercial traction, to be able to scale up their projects to climate relevant scales. That's the piece at which we're trying to come in and play a role at Reearthers. And so we are very early, But what our goal fundamentally is a couple of things. It's to build the system that facilitates efficient knowledge transfer between different actors, certainly between different developers, CDR developers of these techniques, and getting the right CDR developers connected with each other as well. That can be a huge unlock in terms of paying forward the wisdom that perhaps later stage developers, in terms of ones that have gotten more traction, like what were their big learnings that they can pay forward to those earlier on that commercial scale journey. And so to make it a bit more tangible, like there's kind of three big rock pillars to our approach in terms of what we're building. The first is about content. And so that's about saying we want to be very, very focused on really actionable insights rather than, you need the in-depth academic papers, you need the in-depth industry reports. But obviously they can be a little bit high level and theoretical. We want to get much more down to the tactical sharing of knowledge between the developers. And so we're already embarking on a journey of interviewing developers to really do a couple of things, understand their key pain points, like what their biggest learnings for, and crucially for them to share kind of a little bit their key insights to pay forward to other developers. In terms of the structure of the system, we're looking to incorporate both synchronous and asynchronous formats for communication, for the exchange of knowledge in terms of the transfer process, and really to cater to not only just in specific case, but also just in time learning. So what we've been hearing is a lot from developers is a lot about, well, they kind of have to rely on being in the in crowd of which events to be kind of invited to. And while they're great, like deep dive workshops and in person, you can get a hell of a lot done together in a short space of time. It's kind of like if you're constantly worrying, have I missed out on the big event this month that's really going to help me go faster? That's a little bit counterproductive and counterintuitive. And so we want to change that as well. So really, it's about getting the right knowledge surfaced at the right point in time for these developers. Easier said than done, but that's what we're really, really hyper focused on. And to help with that, constantly fine tuning the information architecture in the back end of our system to enable that right knowledge to be surfaced at that right point in time. And of course, thirdly, well, this system is nothing without the people. And so we're trying to build a very open and safe environment, a one of inclusion. Crucially, inclusion is the big one, so people can feel like they belong, where developers can find their place, learn from their peers, and I've talked a lot about it, but we like the pay it forward mindset and mantra to the wider community, because again, that's that ethos of togetherness is going to be the only way forward here on this massive scale journey and challenge that's ahead of us in this space. And so that's what we mean by Reearthers being the collaborative knowledge hub for CDR developers. I suppose like one final ask would be, Brendan, not sure if you're up for a chat, but you're a developer kind of live on the call. But it was kind of like, if anyone here knows of developers, please do kind of hopefully share the word about Reearthers. We're at reearthers.com and help spread that word. As I say, like for this to work, it's the flywheel. Like we need more developers to come on board to use the system for kind of like the premise of this knowledge system to actually kind of work in any scalable way.
And yeah, for me, 100%, I would really, appreciate being involved in this. I think it's very important, especially for the north of the UK. There's a lot of challenges right now, and it seems insurmountable at times, but we're doomed if we do, and we're doomed if we don't, right? So it's all or nothing.
100%. And your point about the north of the UK definitely resonates, Brendan. So yeah, look, great, love to have you involved. I'll follow up with you, and we can pick that up probably afterwards offline if that's cool. But there's 5 minutes left, so maybe there's a couple of final thoughts. I just, this is an apt quote. I wanted to leave you with that. I like my quotes, but it feels apt. It's one of my favorites from Bernard Shaw, which is, people who say it cannot be done, it's a huge challenge. But if you say it cannot be done, we shouldn't be interrupting those that are doing it, though. And so those that are doing it, developers, other ecosystem actors that are working really hard to make this a massive industry, that's kind of like the mindset that we kind of all need. And so with that, I think that's all I had. So yeah, if there's any final thoughts, questions from anybody, I'd love to kind of just hear them or discuss them.
Thanks for running the session, guys. Appreciate it. Very, very interesting. And yeah, more power to you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks also for ASP's involvement as well.
100%. Definitely echo that.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I'm gonna have to jump off in a second, but really, really a pleasure to connect with everybody. I put my LinkedIn in the chat if anybody wants to, connect via LinkedIn. Like I say, we need all the support we can get. However that may be. So, if you're interested in this, I'm happy to have a chat anytime. Like I say, there's massive things to come. We're just barely scratching the surface right now. Right. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, do echo that. Do connect with Brendan. He's a top man.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Really informative.
Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, well, we always like a meeting that finishes a few minutes ahead of the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So yes, if that's all, no final thoughts, I guess, Julia, I guess we can kind of end there and give people a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll just stop the recording.
Just put my email.